take that out. Good morning. So I am live. I'm here in my studio. Bashing things already. Yes, I am live. I am here in my studio. I'm just going to get a couple of things going, and I'm going to explain to you in a minute all the things that I've got going on this morning, because we've got a number of bits and bobs going on. If you are watching live now, please go ahead and chuck your name in the chat. I've got the chat box open up here so I can see hopefully if people are out there, and yeah, there we go, we're all going. So if you're there, if you're listening, go ahead, chuck your name in the chat. I'd love to say hello to you if you are joining me today. Today, as I've advertised, you've hopefully seen this, I'm doing an 8-hour live stream session all day today. So it'd be great if people are around and available. You can jump into the live stream at any point today and watch hopefully some helpful church tech training stuff. So I've got loads of things going on today, in fact let me give you a run through of the day, and then I'll talk you through as well the setup that I've got going on. So you will see here on the screen hopefully that I've got he says, yeah, great. So the plan today, we're going to be running through all of these sessions. I've got a lot of stuff to try and cover today, so I need to try and keep things moving. So we're going to go through some USB audio. How do we connect via USB? This actually was a question that came up on my YouTube comments. I've had a couple of people ask me about how to use USB audio with a digital mixing desk. So we're going to cover that in a minute. I'm going to ask the question, does the Pocket 6K, the Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema Cameras 6K still have a place? I'm talking about the original Pocket 6K, so I'm going to talk about that. Audio systems for churches. I'm going to do a nice basic simple introduction to audio systems for churches, and again I'll just talk about why I'm doing that one in a minute, but we're going to look at that. Sending video. How can we send video around? SDI, NDI, HDMI, all these options. Which one's the best? Which one should we use when? Should you buy a digital mixer in 2023? This video is one that's come off the back of another video that I made. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you may have seen my Should You Buy a Digital Mixer in 2021, made it a couple of years ago. It is still today the #1 watched video on my YouTube channel, and I'm just going to pick up on that because there's a few comments that I've had through that video, so I'm going to just do a slight update on that one. How to do lighting for worship. Look at a bit of lighting and how we use lighting in a worship context. The Stair Review Cob LED review. Now that one, actually I've just realised I didn't update this slide. I've actually changed that. I'm not going to review that lighting fixture. I'm going to review the different product instead. So I have got a couple of products I'm going to review today. I'm not going to review that Cob light, but I might do at some point. I might do a video on that one, so stay tuned for that. But we're going to review some other products today instead. How to use the Allen & Heath SQ5 console. We're going to do a session on that one. Moving on, introducing Worship.church. Worship.church is a platform I have spoken about on this channel before, but I'm going to do a bit more of an introduction on that because that is going to be launched fairly soon. We're getting to a point now where we're ready to launch that website, so that's going to be a really interesting one. Hopefully that will help a lot of churches out. We're really excited about that. Gear review, Desview R5 LED monitor. Again, as I say, a couple of products that we're going to review today, so that's going to be another one of those, so watch out for that in a little while. My audio over Cat 5 boxes. Again, it's a follow-up video from one that I've made previously, so we're going to look at how I fixed them, what I did to change them, and as I say, just picking up on a video that I've made previously. How to mix IEMs. Again, a comment that came in on YouTube asking whether I could do a video on how to mix IEM mixes, so we're going to look at that. Some tips and tricks for Pro Presenter. And again, tips and tricks for live streaming. How do we get the most out of a live stream? Camera tripod. How to use a camera tripod. Might seem really simple and really obvious, but I see a lot of people getting that wrong. So I'm going to do a little update review, kind of how to use a camera tripod and understanding camera tripods. Using background music in churches, some tips and tricks on how to get the most out of your background music when you're using background music. Again, might seem simple, but there's a few things in there that I think a lot of people don't know and don't use. And finally, lens lengths explained. We're going to look at different camera lenses and how you know what lenses are what and which ones to choose and use when. Troubleshooting your system, how to find a problem and fix it. Best practices for church AV. I've got 5 best practices for sound, 5 for video and 5 for lighting, I think it was. I think we've got 15 best practices which we're going to run through. And then an opportunity for comments and questions. So if there are any questions that come up today, if you're watching this and you've got any questions, please again chuck them in the chat. I would love to pick up on any questions that you've got, and I'll do my best to try and answer those today. So let me talk you through the system that I'm using today, because I've got quite a lot going on. And for those of you who do live streaming in your churches, you will, I'm sure, appreciate just how much I've got going on today. And I'm saying this because I want you to bear with me, because I'm probably going to make mistakes, push the wrong button and that kind of thing today. So please bear with me. I am essentially my own camera operator, sound engineer, live stream, vision mixer. I'm doing everything myself today. So let me take you through some of what I've got going on. If I cut over to this camera, hello, this is the wide shot, backstage, behind the scenes kind of shot, so you can see something of what's going on. So this is, for those of you who haven't seen this, this is my little home studio that I've got, and set up around here. You will see, I don't think you can quite see, so I have over there a multi-view monitor, so I can see all the cameras and everything that's going on, and just off the camera shot over there I've got a Pro Presenter computer, which is going to be doing all my slides, and I've got a few videos and things to play back later on as well. I then also have, so we've got Pro Presenter feeding into an ATEM Mini, which again, if I cut back to this one, you might just be able to see that down there. There's an ATEM Mini. That is being controlled by this Stream Deck. So I've got a Stream Deck here, which is actually controlling a few things. I've got it controlling the ATEM. I've got it controlling OBS that I'm streaming from on that computer screen that you can see up there. And I've also got it controlling my Allen & Heath SQ5, which is doing all the audio just off over here. And again, you might be able to see there is a monitor which is showing the SQ5, so that you can see that. In fact, if I cut to this, there you go, there's the SQ5. That's the computer control app, so I can show you some bits on the SQ5 later on. I also have this camera over here, and this is a little mobile camera that I've got set up, so I can move this one around, show you some bits and pieces. So just trying to see which camera we can see this best on. Might be able to see it on this one. Over here there is a little mobile camera that I've got set up. Just to talk you through this setup actually, because it's kind of an interesting one. If I just slide this one over here, we have got here, this is the Blackmagic Micro Cinema camera. So for anybody who's familiar with this, this is just a tiny little block camera, so it doesn't have any kind of screen or anything on it. What I've done is just attach an external monitor here, so I can see the shots that I'm sending to you. And so I've got video coming out of the camera into the monitor, and then out of the monitor back into the ATEM, so you can get that video feed. So it gives me quite a nice, neat little solution to be able to move shots around and hopefully be able to show you products, show you bits and pieces, show you what I'm doing. So I will be using that camera as we go through today. That I think is, audio wise, so I'm going to be using mostly my little radio lapel mic that I've got here, but I also have a couple of other options. So that is now a shotgun mic, and if I cut to this camera, you can just about see it poking into the corner of the shot up here. So shotgun mic as a catch-all, just in case something goes wrong. I've got that up there. Hopefully you can hear that one all right. I also have a, what's this called? V7. Let me cut back to that camera. SEV7 microphone here, which I've recently picked these up, and I'm just doing a bit of testing on this, and this I'm going to use for demonstrating things today as well. So if I need to show you anything again, settings on the SQ5 and things like that, I will use this mic to demonstrate those kind of things. Okay, back to the main microphone. The other thing just to point out as well is you might hear some background noise. I don't know how much that's coming through on the live stream. A lot of that is actually coming from my ProPresenter laptop. Excuse me, my ProPresenter laptop has quite a noisy fan on that computer. Ordinarily in a live situation it doesn't affect anything, there's no problems normally, but in a quiet studio environment actually it stands out quite a lot. So if you can hear some background noise, it's probably the computer laptop going on that you can hear. The other thing also in this studio space is I'm very close to a road. Just behind this wall over here there is a road, so you do from time to time hear cars going past again. So bear with all of that. Hopefully it won't be too distracting or too much of a problem for you, and hopefully we should have quite a good day today. As I say, there's lots of things planned, we've got 19, I think I counted them up this morning, 19 sessions to run through to take you through various things. So we're going to move in a second into our first session, which is going to be USB audio. As I say, this came from a YouTube comment that I received. So I do try and read all the YouTube comments that come in. If you've got any questions, anything like that, please do leave me a comment and I will check that and hopefully do my best to answer those questions that you've got. And particularly for today, any questions, chuck them in the comments. I'll pick those up and I will do my best to answer those. So yeah, I think that is everything that you need to know for now for my setup. We will probably look at a few other bits and pieces as we go forwards today, but let's for now move over into our first session. So the first session that we've got to do is this one, where we're going to be talking about USB audio. Now, USB audio, this question actually came, it was kind of two separate comments that came in. I didn't actually make a note of the comments, and I probably should have done. So there's a few things that we've got today that have come in from a few things that have come in from YouTube comments. And I didn't make a note of exactly who asked the question and what the question was, but USB audio was asked by two separate people. One of them was saying, how do I connect a laptop to a computer via USB? So we'll look at that. The other question was, how do I use USB audio from a mixing desk to do my live stream? So what I thought we'd do is kind of combine those two questions together, and we will deal with both of those two things together. So the first question, how do we connect a computer to a desk, mixing desk for just generally getting audio in and out of a computer is actually a really good question. For some people it might seem really simple and really obvious, but there's one thing that quite often I find trips people up, and that is setting the mode that you need to use your computer. To use your mixing desk. So most mixing desks, let me find my little prop here. Most mixing desks will have a USB Type B connector on, and let me just spin my little camera around over here and I'll see if I can show you a shot of this. Here we go. So this here, if you can see this is a USB Type B connector, and it's the little sort of squarish one, looks a little bit like a house almost. kind of slightly strange shape, but there you go, that's the USB Type B connector. If I put it alongside the other one, this is the USB Type A that you might consider to be a more sort of normal USB shape. So there the two are there. Sometimes people might call this a printer cable. They're quite often used for connecting up a printer to a computer. And this type of connector you will often find on the back of a digital mixing desk, and it's what enables you to bring audio in and out of a computer, out of a mixing desk. But most mixing desks actually have both types of connectors on them. You will have a USB-B and a USB-A. There's a Ant Tech Geek, I'm guessing that's Anthony Lear. Hello Anthony, good to see you. Interspace USB PC DI is a great piece of kit for okay, so there's a little DI box that brings in a USB connection. Yeah, check out the comments if you want to see that. Anyway, most mixing desks have both types of connectors on them. Very often you will find the USB-A connector on the front and the USB-B connector on the back, and basically what you need to do is somewhere in the settings in that mixing desk you need to tell it which of those two connectors you're using. So if you ever connect into the one on the back with the USB-B connector but you can't get audio in and out from it, it's probably because the mixer is looking for audio on the other connector on the front of the mixing desk. And basically the idea is either the one on the front generally you would use for like plugging in an SSD or a little USB stick or something like that, and probably be using that for some sort of recording. You can use it for playback as well, but most helpful thing is to be able to just plug in a USB stick on the front, hit record and record out your audio onto your drive, whatever drive you've plugged in. If you want to use the audio on the back and send it to a laptop, you need to actually change the mode inside your mixer to do that. And different mixers, so whether you're using like a Behringer X32 or an Allen & Heath QU or SQ or whatever kind of console you're using, they're going to call it a slightly different thing. So Allen & Heath talk about the Q drive. X32, I can't remember what they call it on the X32, but they've all given it a slightly different name. But essentially what you're doing is you're saying, am I going to be using the input on the front, or am I going to be using the input on the back to connect to my USB? And generally you can't use both. You have to choose one or the other. So that's the bit that very often trips people up, and they'll plug in their connector, plug it into their laptop and go, it's all connected, it should be working, but I'm not getting any audio, why is it not working? And 9 times out of 10 it's just because you've got the wrong mode selected in your settings in your mixer. So just check that, find those settings. Again, different mixers are going to be slightly different places, but just go into the settings or preferences or something like that and just try and find the bit relating to USB and then check what source it's using for the USB. Okay, Anthony's just put another comment, and you tend to also need to use some drivers. Yeah, possibly you might need to have some drivers installed as well. So again, just check that if you're not getting a connection, make sure you've got the drivers in there if you need those. So once you've checked your mode, selected the mode that you need, as I say, plug in with the USB-B cable on the back and then plug the other end of that into your laptop. Hopefully your laptop should recognize your mixer as an audio device, and you should be able to select that, and depending on what you're doing with it, whether you're using it for playback or whether you're using it for recording, you can send audio both ways. So it doesn't matter which way you're going with it, you can send it in either direction, although normally you're going to choose one or the other. So either you're going to be using it just for playback or you're going to be using it just for recording. You wouldn't be trying to send audio in both directions. I've never tried doing that actually. Anthony's obviously watching. I don't know whether Anthony's ever tried sending audio in and out via USB at the same time. I don't know whether that works or if that's possible. But you're probably going to be wanting to either use it for recording or for playback, not for both. So set it up with the relevant software for what it is that you're trying to achieve. The other thing to check is check sample rate. So with digital audio, you want to make sure that you are matching your sample rate. And this will be a really obvious one, because if you plug it in, it will just sound very weird. It will sound like the aliens have taken over and the mixing desk just got some weird kind of digital distortion effect thing going on, and everything will just sound bizarre. And that is probably because you've got a frame rate mismatch. So typical digital mixers will be running at possibly 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. Most of them generally these days are going to be a 48 kilohertz sample rate. Some of them might even be a 96 kilohertz sample rate. They're going to have different options. Sometimes you can choose in the console what you want it to be running at. So you can choose whether it's going to be at 96 or 48. Take your pick there. But you then need to make sure that your laptop is running at the same sample rate. Oh, we've got another comment, Matthew. I don't recognise your name. I don't think I know you, but hi Matthew, great to have you along. Yeah, it's difficult to do both over USB. Yeah, but if you use Dante, yes. So that would be the other way to do it. If you want to send it audio in and out at the same time through a laptop, maybe use USB to send it out and Dante to bring it back in or whatever. Yeah, great. Yeah, where did we get to? Sample rates. Make sure you've got your sample rates all matched and everything's running at the same sample rate. If you don't, you will have issues with that. So connect it up. Choose your USB output on the mixer, and then make sure you've got your sample rates all matched. And at that point, everything should be working, and you should be getting audio in or out as you need it. Why would you want to use USB over, say, a headphones jack? For years, people have connected. Alex, great. Hi, nice to see you. No, you're not too late to the party. Welcome along. Thanks for joining. Another comment just coming in. Thanks, guys. It's great to see these comments coming in, actually. It's nice to see people. Chuck your name in. Also, just chuck in where you're from as well. It'd be really interesting just to see who's watching this and where you are, and even tell me what time of day it is. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here, but I know that we might have people watching from other countries as well. So chuck in where you're from and tell me what time of day it is, and whether we've got some night owls watching this at stupid o'clock at night or something. I don't know, but yeah, it's great to have you. Anyway, back to audio. Why would we choose to use a digital connection? And this applies, actually, we had the comment about Dante audio. This would apply to Dante as well as USB, any kind of digital connection. Why would we do that over a headphones 3.5mm jack? So quite often churches will be using 3.5mm jack. The thing with the 3.5mm jack is it's only a stereo connection. You've only got two channels, effectively. You've got a left channel and a right channel. With any kind of digital, USB, Dante, whatever it is that you might be using, you open up a lot more channels. So I think typically the USB allows up to 32 channels of audio. Dante, you can do even more than 32. You're unlikely to need all 32 of those channels, but you might conceivably want to run multiple channels. So for example, in our church, we use ProPresenter, and we've got quite a lot of audio going through ProPresenter. So our ProPresenter's doing song lyrics on the screens. But what we also do with that is we actually have 8 channels of audio coming out of our ProPresenter computer. So that's 4 stereo pairs. And we have a countdown video that we play as the service is starting. So we just sort of use it as a just to focus people to worship, just to let them know that we're about to start, all that kind of stuff. Alex in Kenya, 12:24 in Kenya right now, apparently. Great, thanks for that. Really, that's interesting to know. Thank you. So we have a countdown video that we start with the service, and so we actually give that its own dedicated channel on the mixer, and the reason for that is because it means that we can set that volume, and then we actually deliberately bury that channel on a layer that nobody ever uses, so that that volume never changes. So we know that that volume is set to the right level, and when that countdown video starts, we know that audio is going to come through, everybody's going to hear it, it's all going to be there, and it's going to just work. So we just put that on a channel, we leave that channel open, we set that volume, and then we don't adjust it, and we know that is set and that's all ready. So the Pro Presenter is actually set with a timed event, so that the countdown timer just automatically starts at the correct time of day. So the service starts and the timer just kicks in. And that's the call for everybody to say, hey, look, guys, it's a 60-second timer for us. You've got 60 seconds and the service is going to be starting. Everybody get ready, take your seats and that kind of thing. And it brings online and in person together. It goes out to both places simultaneously. So we have 2 channels for that. We then have, we use Pro Presenter to do pads. So we've got some pre-recorded pad audio, so like kind of keyboard pad sounds. That we can just add in, it just gives an extra dynamic to the band, and we trigger that through Pro Presenter. And again, I might touch on that a bit more later on, but we have pads audio coming out of the Pro Presenter computer, so that comes into 2 separate channels. We have background, so we use Spotify, but whatever kind of background music that you're playing, so pre and post service, we'll just put some Spotify on or some background music on. That comes into its own channel, and again we separate all these things out, so we've just got independent control of them, so we can set our pads level with the band, so we've got that in the mix. I would also EQ that for the band, so we can get an EQ on that and make sure that's sounding good with the band and all sitting right with the band. And then we don't have to change those faders for our background music, so we can leave that, and then we've got a separate channel for our background music, so the background will come into separate audio channels. So again, we can set a separate EQ and a separate volume level for that, independent of the pads and independent of the countdown timer. And then we finally have a VT channel as well. So VT will give us the ability to be able to play, if we're running an alpha course or something and we want to put on the alpha video, we can bring that through into the VT channel. And again, we've got another separate set of EQ, separate set of volume, separate set of everything. So nothing interferes with anything else that we've got going on. So you have the ability to open up a lot more audio channels with a single cable out of your computer that gives you the ability to be able to bring all those things separately into your mixing desk. So that's why you might want to consider some kind of digital connection out of your laptop. So let's move on to the second part of that question then. So as I say, this was 2 separate comments on YouTube, how and why we might want to connect up via USB. But then how can we use that for a live stream? Now there's a number of ways that you could use this for a live stream. You could take all 32 audio channels out and run that into something like Logic or some sort of DAW, and you could do a full multi-track mix into some kind of software and do a full mix for your audio for live stream. It's entirely possible. I think it would work fairly well. I don't think you'd have any real issues with that. So you could do it. So you just take channel outs for every single channel, feed them into a computer, mix all that audio in your computer, and create probably a fairly decent audio mix. The one thing that you would struggle with is USB doesn't really send over any great distance. So if you were using USB, you would have to have your live streaming laptop right next to your sound desk, and the trouble with that is that you will always struggle monitoring that audio because you're going to be in the room with the sound desk with a big PA system kind of drowning out what you're hearing in your in-ears. So you're going to struggle to monitor that well. So it could work, but just monitoring might be a bit difficult for you. The way that I would probably recommend over that is to use this to bring out an aux feed. So an aux or possibly a matrix or something like that, but some sort of mix out of the console. So you can just take a stereo feed, just 2 channels, so not using very much of the capacity of a USB cable, but we've got some of that capacity there. And you then have the ability to be able to remote mix that via something like an iPad. Most digital mixers will have an iPad app that you can use to control audio with. And so you could open up the iPad app and you could take yourself off into a separate room, and you could actually then control the separate volume levels off that console from a stereo aux, and have the ability to be able to create an independent mix that way. Now, the downside of that option is, how do you monitor that from a remote room? Because although the app will give you control, it won't give you any audio. So you could sit in a separate room and you could monitor the mix from the live stream, but you've got to bear in mind that that live stream is 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds behind real time. So if you make an adjustment on the fader, you will then need to wait for 15 seconds before you hear that adjustment have any effect, if that makes sense. So you're always going to be monitoring behind any adjustments that you make. So again, just a slightly problematic, tricky way to do it, but at least you will be monitoring a much more clean audio feed. So pros and cons both ways around. Dante in that instance actually could be a better option, because that gives you real-time audio, or very close to real-time audio, that you can monitor remotely, and you could still use the app to control. So you could take an aux feed via Dante. This is assuming, of course, you've got the Dante card in your mixer. Depending on which mixer you've got, that may or may not be feasible. Dante cards at the minute are very difficult to get hold of for some consoles, so yeah, that might be an option for you, it might not. Oh, we've got another Earworm Ministries, Earworm Ministries, sorry, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. USB for the mixer failed us, so we opted for an aux connection into a budget audio interface and then into our laptop running over this. Yeah, so that would be essentially the same thing. You're just obviously making a connection. You're not connecting directly to the laptop. You connect to the mixer. You're connecting via the interface. So yes, very much the same sort of thing. Be interesting to know why USB failed you. It's normally fairly robust. I don't have a lot of problems with it, so it'd be interesting to know what the issue was that you had there. But yeah, great. Yeah, another way to do it, works well. So that, yeah, that pretty much covers us for this session. Now, the one thing that I wanted to kind of leave you with, really, with USB audio is just to try and make sure you understand your routing. Routing is quite key here. You need to get your head around sending multiple channels of audio down a single cable, and then how you go about routing an aux into that USB. And so routing is quite a key aspect of being able to use this, both in terms of your mixer setup, but like I say, if you're running multiple channels out of ProPresenter, you need to be able to settle that routing in ProPresenter and be able to get all that audio out of ProPresenter as well. So there's a lot of routing options that can go on here, and routing can get quite complicated and quite confusing. So yeah, just bear that all in mind, because there's quite a lot going on in that. And if you're a relatively new person to digital audio and digital mixing, and getting your heading around routing can be quite tricky and quite complicated. My tip, if you're new to this, my big tip would be stick to what we call a one-to-one patch, or a one-to-one route, where you're sending channel 1 to output 1. You'll see, in fact I can show you this. So this is what we call a routing matrix. I don't want to spend too long on this, but I'll just very quickly show you this. So this is the routing matrix on my mixing desk, and you can see here that I've got some channels. So like channel 3, for example, the third channel down here is routed to channel 3, channel 3 to channel 3, channel 4 to channel 4, 5 to 5, 6 to 6, 7 to 7, 8 to 8. That's a one-to-one patch through all of those there. Now it is possible, and you can see this here with channels 1 and 2, that you can route channel 1 to channel 2 and channel 2 to channel 1, which is what we've done here. So this is saying the first input is my shotgun mic, which was the mic that I showed you at the beginning. This mic up here, shotgun microphone. The shotgun microphone is actually not, so it's the first channel on my mixer, but it's taking its input from input number 2. And likewise with my radio mic, the lapel mic that I'm talking into right now, it's channel 2 on my mixer, but it's taking its input from channel 1. So it can get quite confusing. Routing matrices can be quite complicated, and you can start to really confuse yourself when you start mixing and matching and crossing things across. So if you're going to do that, make sure you are very comfortable with a routing matrix and you know how it's all working. If you don't know how it's all working and you struggle with routing matrices, stick to a 1-to-1 patch. 1-to-1, 2-to-2, 3-to-3, 4-to-4, all the way through. Make sure you've got something that looks like that. This nice straight diagonal line that runs straight through all of those channels. And that's just a simple way to get yourself into routing. Right, I'm going to stop there on that one. That hopefully has covered lots on digital audio, USB audio, all that kind of stuff, ins and outs. So, one thing I didn't explain at the beginning is that with the Pro Presenter, one of the things I'm doing, what I want to try and do today is to keep this day moving fairly well. I'm going to use this, cut to this one, this little monitor here I've got that's coming, basically it's giving me a stage display from Pro Presenter, and what I've got on here are a couple of countdown timers. So I have got a countdown timer for the full 8 hours of the whole day today, so we've currently got 7 hours and 24 minutes remaining. The other thing I've also got on here is a countdown timer per session, so I'm going to try and stick to time as much as I can just to keep things moving, keep things engaging, try not to let things drag too much. So I am going to move us on, set the next countdown timer going, and we are going to dive straight into our next session. So our next session is, does the Pocket 6K still have a place? And this session I am talking about the original Pocket 6K camera, and I've got one down here. Here we go. So this is my Pocket 6K. For anybody who's followed this channel for a while, you will know that I use pretty much exclusively Blackmagic cameras. So I'm currently looking at a Pocket 6K. The view that you are looking at right now is a Pocket 6K, so I've got 2 of these cameras. The shot that I've got over here, that's a Pocket 4K, so my wide camera over there is the 4K. As I say, my little handheld camera over here, there we go, this camera is the micro cinema camera, Blackmagic micro cinema camera. I'm a big Blackmagic camera fan. I think they're brilliant cameras. And as I say, I've got 2 of the original Pocket 6K. Now, anybody who knows about the Blackmagic camera family will know that they have brought out various variations on this camera. So the Pocket 6K, I don't know when it was actually released, but it was several years ago now, the Pocket 6K. They then upgraded it to the 6K Pro, and they've now brought out the 6K G2. And so the question today is, does the Pocket 6K still have a place? Now, I'll throw this up for you. This was the little review I did. So I have on this channel already reviewed Pocket 6K versus the Pocket 4K, and which one is the best and which one would I recommend. They're both great cameras. I do like them both, but I do definitely prefer the 6K over the 4K. I think the image quality, there's a different sensor in those 2 cameras, and the image that you get out of the 6K is significantly better than the image out of the 4K. Now, in terms of the 6K versus 6K Pro versus 6K G2, it's worth understanding the differences that there are between those models. There's a few things that were upgraded as they moved from the 6K to the Pro and the G2. One of the things that happened was they did change the body shape, so the newer versions are slightly bigger than this one. It's difficult to see because this one if I get this camera set up on here, this camera has been modified. So I've put a cage on it, I've put a top handle on it. At the minute it's got an external battery on it. It's also got a plate at the bottom here with the ability to be able to put 15mm rods in it and stuff as well. So there's lots of accessories on this one, which does make it look bigger than it actually is. The term pocket cinema camera is a very confusing one because there is absolutely no way that you could get one of these in your pocket. You would have to have very big pockets to fit one of these in. It really isn't a pocket camera anymore, but it comes from the very original HD camera that they had, which was pocket sized. It was a much smaller camera, but they've kind of grown on from there. So this was the original Pocket 6K. As I say, the 6K Pro and the 6K G2 are a bigger body size, and that's important because when they built the 6K Pro, they built a number of accessories that mounted onto that body size. So there's a electronic viewfinder EVF that can mount onto the top of them. There's things like lens control options and stuff like that that all attach onto that body shape and size. So it has to be that bigger body size to mount to any of those accessories. So this won't take the EVF or any of those other options. And that's important, and I'll come back onto that in a minute. The other things that changed with that, so with the Pro, you got the flip out screen. So this one, it's just a fixed screen on the back of here. So there's no adjustment on this screen, which at times that can be annoying. There are certainly times when this camera just, you can't really see what you're doing on this screen. Either it's up above my head or it's down too low. You just can't see that, so it can be annoying at times, but I get around that by adding an external monitor to it. So for me, it's not the end of the world. It's a slightly annoying issue, but it's not the end of the world. The other things they improved on it were the battery capacity. These ones, so this one runs off the Canon LPE6, which on that battery, I think you get like 25 minutes of film time before you need to change the battery out. The new ones run, I think it's on an NPF battery, probably not this size, but a slightly smaller NPF batteries. Again, talk about NPFs in a minute. But there's also the ability to put underneath it a battery handle, so you can actually put two batteries into the camera base, which again just significantly increases the runtime. But again, I've spoken on this channel in the past about my NPF batteries because I use NPF batteries on everything. NPF batteries run everything. So they run my monitors, they run the cameras. So this camera is running on an NPF. This camera's got an NPF in here, so I can power this on right now. And again, if I switch over to the handheld, you'll see this come to life. There we go. That's all just running on battery right now. And all I do is I put these NPF battery plates. So that's just a plate there that's screwed onto the top of the camera, and it then has a power cable that comes around and powers it off the NPF battery there. For me, again, I'm not bothered by internal batteries in this camera. If you were hand holding the camera and you needed something that was lightweight, then maybe that might be a consideration for you. But for me, most of the time it's going to be on a tripod or possibly a monopod. So the weight isn't that much of a consideration. I'm quite happy to do it. And again, in churches, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be powering it off the mains rather than a battery anyway. It's going to be sat on a tripod, plugged into the mains, and I don't need to worry about batteries. I don't need to worry about runtime. So batteries has never really been a consideration for me either. Now you might be able to hear these cameras do have internal fans, and that's quite noisy. So I am going to turn that off again so we don't have any more noise running in here than we need to. The other things they added were ND filters. This, for anybody who doesn't know, this is an ND filter. Essentially, think sunglasses for a camera. An ND filter just reduces the light levels coming into your camera. Really useful, in fact I'd say critical really, if you're filming anything outdoors. But again, inside a church building, ND filters don't have a lot of use. Now, I'm pretty certain both the 6K Pro and the G2 both have internal ND filters. which, as I say, if you're filming outdoors, might be really, really useful to you. If you're filming indoors, you're very unlikely to need them. I'm not bothered by an internal ND filter. Very rarely do I film anything outdoors, and when I do, I'm quite happy just to attach an ND filter to the outside of the lens. So ND filters don't really add a great deal for me. It might be that some of these things are helpful to you. It might be that you find a increased battery capacity helpful. It might be that you find ND filters helpful. But for me, none of these things have ever been a big consideration. And the final thing that they did as well was to increase the brightness of the screen. So the new G2, I think this is on the G2 only, is a brighter screen than all the others previously. And again, there are some times, particularly if you're filming outdoors, where the brightness of this screen is a little bit dark. But I never have that problem inside. Inside it's absolutely fine. In fact, most of the time I turn the screen brightness down. I don't need it to be full brightness for inside. And again, quite often churches, you're probably going to be at the back. It's probably going to be relatively dark. Even if it's fully lit inside a church building, you're unlikely to have light issues on your screen at the back. So I never find that to be anything of a concern either. So for me, the 6K Pro and the 6K G2 have negligible differences that would actually give me any real benefit. So for me, I think for most church use, the original 6K is still a really great option. The thing that's never changed is the sensor. The sensor is exactly the same in all of the camera models. So this same sensor that was in this camera is in the 6K Pro and the 6K G2. So the image quality is always exactly the same. You've still got your HDMI out for live streaming. You're still recording the same B-RAW. It's still Gen 5 color. It's still the same sensor. Everything is still exactly the same. The things that have changed are the accessories, the bits on the outside, the screen, the batteries, lens control options, ND filters. It's all those sort of extra bits on the outside, and none of those extra bits are, for me, enough of a game changer to make me want to change these cameras. I love the output that comes out of these cameras. It's a really great looking camera. I've filmed some really nice things with it. Both filming and live streaming, I think it works really well. I've spoken in the past about how I use these cameras. There's one church that I do quite a lot of work with who have a couple of the Ursas, which is the sort of the big brother to these cameras. So these cameras, as a rough ballpark, the camera body plus the lens, you're probably looking at about £2,000-ish. The Ursas, the big brother, you're looking more like £5,000 or £6,000 for those cameras. Significantly more expensive camera. But for me, I'm very happy to put the 6K alongside the Ursa and run those two for a live stream or something like that. They sit together pretty well. You can definitely tell that the Ursa is more expensive, but the differences are minimal. It's noticeable, definitely noticeable, but there's absolutely no problem in running the two side by side. So for me, as a significantly less expensive and still very reasonable alternative to an Ursa, this is a really good, really solid camera. So yes, I absolutely think there is still place for the original Pocket 6K. Now, as I've said, there might be some occasions where you find the benefits of the 6K Pro or the 6K G2 useful to you. You might say that better battery life or ND filters or a tiltable screen. Tiltable screen is the one thing that I'd say if I could upgrade to a Pro or even the G2 and get the tiltable screen, that I would get some benefit from. But it's not enough of a benefit for me to say, well, I'll get rid of my 6Ks and upgrade everything to the Pro. It's just not enough in it. Now, one of the things I said at the beginning was I'll come back to this accessories thing. As I say, you've got the EVF and all these accessories that they've built to fit on the G2. And having sort of done a bit of research and things online, there's a few suggestions that people have made about the reason why they haven't yet upgraded the sensor in these cameras. And a lot of people are saying that because the Ursas, the bigger camera, hasn't had an upgrade for a long time. They've done a couple of upgrades on the 6K, but no upgrades on the Ursa. And probably, I think many people would say the Ursa is due an upgrade. It is relatively old, and it only has a 4.6K resolution, which although is fine for most situations, most of the newer Blackmagic cameras that they're bringing out now have 6K, 8K, 12K resolution, so much higher resolution. So it would make sense that the Ursa, so I'm talking about the Ursa Mini Pro G2 is the one that they've got out at the minute. That model, the 4.6K model, is probably the next one that will get the upgrade. And when it does, they're going to want to be able to keep the accessories that they've designed, the EVF and the lens control and all that sort of stuff that mounts onto the 6K camera. They're going to want to keep that alive and keep that going. And so one of the theories that I've seen online is that the reason they've upgraded the 6K to the 6K G2 but not really changed the sensor is because they're leaving a gap for an upgrade for the Ursa 4.6, which I think makes a lot of sense, and they might well do that, and it will be very interesting to see what they bring out to fill that space. And maybe at that point, that might be a time to consider upgrading these. But for the time being, I don't think any of the upgrades that they've made to the 6K are enough of an upgrade for me to warrant changing this out. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Pocket Cinema cameras. I love all of them. They're really great. If anybody's considering one of these cameras for a church, I would generally say they're a really good option. The only thing about them is they are, in my opinion, they're definitely moving into the pro range of cameras. And at that point, the big thing there is I think you need to know how to run a camera. It doesn't really have any auto settings. There are some things that you can put into auto mode, but it doesn't really do it very well, I don't think. Things like autofocus. Its autofocus is not great. It's okay. You have to push a button. It then sort of hunts for that focus, and then it will find it, and then it will just sit there. And so if you're trying to track a preacher moving around a stage, your autofocus isn't going to lock on that person and then follow them as they move backwards and forwards across the stage. You're going to track them, you're going to focus on them, and then as soon as they move, it's going to go out of focus again. Now, I don't mind pulling focus manually. That works fairly well, and using focus assist, it can be quite. It's a nice organic way to change focus. I think it works fairly well. So for me, that's not a big issue. But you need to have a camera operator who is able to do that, who's able to pull focus manually, or use remote control focus. That's also fine, but I wouldn't rely on the autofocus in these cameras to do that kind of stuff. And it's things like that that just take this from a simple level user operating system to kind of a more advanced technical camera operator, somebody who knows about focus, somebody who knows about ISO and aperture and all those kind of things, because pretty much all of it's going to have to be set manually. Like I say, there are some options for auto white balance. There is an auto exposure box that you can tick and turn that on. It can do those things, but really it's very much aimed at a user manually adjusting all of those things. The user experience is great. User interface is really nice clear buttons on the back, all that sort of stuff is really great. So it is a nice camera to operate, and all the manual settings on there are nice and easy to use, so I have no problems in doing it. But you just need to be aware that basically you're in control of this camera, and you need to know how to make all the adjustments that it needs to make it work. And that's the one point that I'd say, if you're in a church where you don't have experienced camera operators, people don't know about how to set all those things, how to adjust all those things, then you might want to say, actually, let's find a camera that's going to automatically adjust things more easily than this will. So yeah, I completely think there is still a place for a Pocket 6K camera. The original Pocket 6K, I think it still has a lot of value. It's still a great camera, and I'm still a big fan. So there we go, a nice little bit of a look at video. As I've said today, I want to try and it's not just an audio training day, this is a whole church tech training day. So we are going to look at video, we are going to look at lighting, we are going to look at audio. We're going to try and cover as many different options and as many different things as we possibly can. So there's quite a lot to move through today. One of the other things that we're going to try and do is to cover different experience levels as well. So I am going to dive in a second into a much more basic audio level. So we're going to talk about now audio systems for churches. Now this session, one of the things I forgot to say at the beginning was that when I was preparing for this live stream, put my camera back on again. When I was preparing for this live stream, I actually asked AI to plan out a couple of sessions for me, and I found it really interesting. So I asked an AI, a chatbot, Chat GPT or whatever it's called. I asked it to give me, I think it was 8 sessions. I said, this is the date. I'm going to do a live stream training day on YouTube. Give me 8 sessions that I can teach. And this is what it came back with. It came back with Church AV 101, an introduction to audiovisual technology for worship. Session 2, sound systems for churches, how to optimize audio quality in your sanctuary. Session 3 was video systems for worship, using projectors, cameras and screens to enhance worship. Session 4, lighting for worship, creating a worshipful atmosphere with lighting techniques. Session 5, live streaming for your churches, tips and techniques for success. Session 6, troubleshooting church AV systems, common problems and solutions. Session 7, maintaining your church AV equipment, keeping your system in good working order. And then Session 8, best practices for church AV, how to safely set up, operate and store your equipment. And I thought they were really interesting sessions. I thought that was a really good overview. I mean, the AI that's out there right now is super clever and it can really do some very amazing things. And so I was really impressed with this. And I actually took some inspiration for some of those. And you may have noticed some of the titles that I read out at the beginning are basically derived from this. I've just sort of taken these and adapted them slightly. And this was the first one that I came up to. So I thought I'd do a basic 101 church sound system, like how to get started, super basic level of church sound systems. So I've not seen any comments come in for a little while. I don't know if anybody's still out there watching, but if you are, this one is particularly aimed at beginners and people getting into church sound. If that's not you, feel free to go and grab a coffee, call back in later on. I'm going to be moving on to some other stuff. So yeah, it would be, if you're still there, chuck some stuff in the chat. And if not, go and grab a coffee and I'll see you in a few minutes. But for those of you who want to know about basic sound, how to get started, what do you need to know about 101 church sound systems, this is the session for you. So we're going to talk through an audio system, an audio chain. How do we start to build things together? What are the basic building blocks of a sound system, and how do they all work and how do they all connect together? And when we do that, we're going to start with one of these. Okay, we're going to start an audio system with an input device, a microphone. There are a few ways that we can get sound into a sound system, and when we talk about sound system, I'm talking about a connected bunch of equipment, bits of equipment all connected together. So it's a system because it's lots of things all connected together to make it all work as one. So we start with an input device, and that connects into something else, and that connects into something else, and that connects into something else, and we work our way down the chain until the sound comes out of some speakers or something like that. Okay, so we're going to start with a microphone. There are other types of input devices that you can have. In fact, I've got one of them over there. Let me just see if I can go and grab that without... I'm also wired into some in-ears so I can hear what's going out on the stream, so I need to not pull my in-ears out. There we go. Oh, I've just dropped a mic on the floor as well. So we've got two input devices. So you will have in your churches, almost certainly all your churches are going to be using both of these two things. You're going to have microphones and you're going to have DI boxes. And they're both ways of getting sound into your sound system. So microphones, I'm sure most people are going to be fairly familiar with a microphone. A microphone is going to give you the ability to be able to bring sound in for singers and preachers and whoever's going to be using one of these. I'm sure you've all seen a microphone. You've probably all held a microphone. You've possibly even spoken into a microphone. They come in various different shapes and sizes. This one is a wired one, means it's got a wire attached to it. You will also find that some of them are wireless. You will have radio microphones that don't have wires plugged directly into them. You will also find that some of them are like this one. This is a lapel clip-on, so very small little mini microphone. You might have headset microphones, and as I say, you'll have wireless handheld microphones, so it will look a bit like that without the wire coming out the end of it. And all of these are various different types of microphones, and they all do slightly different jobs. They're all designed for slightly different things, but essentially they're all going to do the same thing, and that is convert sound waves into a signal that we can then do something with. We can send it through a mixing desk, we can start to process it and do something with that sound. And the way that we generally connect up a microphone is, I'll switch over to this, with one of these connectors. Now, I don't know whether I can... I think that's slightly better. So this is what's called an XLR connector. An XLR connector is a very common connector that you find on a PA system. As I say, you use it in things like microphones. It's got a few little features to it. So they have a lock, and there'll be a little button somewhere that you have to press to release them. They also have a male end and a female end, and you don't need to worry too much about that for the time being. But what that means is it's actually fairly hard to plug in an XLR the wrong way round. So they will always have one end that is supposed to fit into the device that you're using. So if you want to plug a microphone in, there is only one end that will connect into that. The other end of the cable physically will not fit. So if you find two ends of a cable that don't connect together, it probably means either you've got the wrong end of the cable, or you're trying to plug it into something that it isn't supposed to be plugged into. For instance, if I wanted to try and plug together a DI box and a microphone, you will find that those connectors physically will not fit. They are exactly the same connector, and if I switch back to this camera you might be able to see this. Exactly the same type of connector, so that's what we call the male XLR. That one is the female XLR. Hopefully you can see that they are just slightly different connectors. This one's got pins, this one's got sockets. The pins go into the sockets, the pins will not go into the pins. So if you try to connect a male to a male, it physically won't fit, which is quite nice because it means that you can't really get it wrong. If it's designed to connect together, it will connect together, and if it's designed not to connect together, it physically won't connect together. So as a beginner, it's a fairly easy way to start. So if your cable will physically fit into your microphone, then it probably is an input cable, and you've probably got the right one, and it's probably going to work. So you plug your microphone in. The DI box does exactly the same thing. You plug that into there, but a DI box also has another connector on the other end, and this is for connecting an instrument. So if you've got a guitar or a keyboard or a bass or anything like that, you would plug your jack cable from the instrument into the other side of this, and that allows you to bring an instrument into your PA system. DI boxes for instruments, microphones for singers and speakers. Generally, that's the rule. From there, That XLR cable will run back to normally some kind of a stage box, and the connections on a stage we generally call a stage box, and you will have different types of connectors. There might be one central place that all the cables go back to one connection box, or sometimes you might have multiple little connection boxes all around the stage. You could have little stage boxes dotted around the stage, and you plug into different ones. So the drums will plug into one box, a guitar will plug into a different box, keyboards will plug into a different box, and they can all have their own little connection boxes around the stage. Doesn't matter which way around you do it, they're all going to be stage box connections, and you plug into whichever one you need to plug into that's normally the closest one to where you are. Those stage boxes then are going to run back to your mixing desk. And a mixing desk is probably going to look something like this. So this here is a mixing desk. Now this one is a mixer called the Allen & Heath SQ5 console, but there are various different makes and models of stage boxes, of mixing desks. And digital mixing desks, broadly speaking, are all going to look fairly similar. You're all going to have a number of faders at the bottom that you can slide up and down that make things louder and quieter. They'll have a number of buttons here in the middle. Different mixing desks will have slightly different buttons, but they'll have a row of buttons in there that you can use to do different things with, and then they're generally going to have some kind of a screen in the middle of them. That's the digital mixing desks will probably have some kind of a screen section up here that you can look at that will tell you some information on them. Now, if your mixing desk doesn't have a screen on it, then it's probably an analog mixing desk, and analog mixing desks are still okay. You find them from time to time. They're less common these days. It's generally a slightly older thing. Back in the olden days, we used to use analog audio all the time. Analog mixing desks were very, very common. These days, they're much less common, and these days you're more likely to see a digital mixing desk than you are an analog desk. Most of the time, most churches have moved away from analog to digital now. And it's fairly rare to come across an analog desk. So often the easiest way to tell whether you've got a digital or an analog desk is to say, does it have a screen on it? If it's got a screen on it, then it's probably digital. If it doesn't have a screen on it, then it's probably analog. And if you're not sure, then ask somebody. But that's normally the distinction between the two. But whether it's analog or digital, they're going to be doing the same thing. And a mixing desk is bringing all of your inputs in, and it allows you to mix those inputs, which just means kind of combine them together. And you can combine them at different levels. So you can have some things louder and some things quieter, combine them together, and then you're going to send them somewhere. The mixing desk is going to bring some inputs in, and it's going to send them out somewhere else. So it's going to do some what we call processing. It's going to bring things in, process them, and then send them back out again. And that's what a mixing desk does. Now, the main thing a mixing desk does is it's going to bring all your microphones and instruments and things in, and then send them out to your speakers so that people can hear them. And in order to get audio from a microphone through the XLR into your stage box, into your mixer, and then out to your speakers, you're going to need to send it to a thing called an amplifier. And depending on your system, you might have a big black box somewhere that's got some amplifiers in it, and you might have what we call external amplifiers or rack-mounted amplifiers. Often refers to them with different terminology, but there'll be a box somewhere. You need to make sure you've got that turned on for the sound to get to the speakers. They will need to be powered. If you haven't got those, then your amplifiers will probably be built into the speakers themselves, and sometimes you have speakers with a built-in amplifier. We call them active speakers, and in that case you need to make sure your speakers are turned on. But those amplifiers, whether they're in the speakers or out of the speakers, will need to be turned on. They need power to make them work. So find out where your amplifiers are, find out how to turn them on, because if you can't do that, you won't get any sound to come to your speakers. So you might need to ask somebody in your church how you do that, where they are, how you turn them on. Once you've figured that out, at that point you should be able to get some sound out of your speakers. You should be able to take a microphone, plug it into an XLR, connect that to a stage box, connect that to your mixing desk, and then as you push that fader up, that sound should get louder in those speakers, and if you pull that fader down, the sound will get quieter in the speakers. Now, as well as sending sound to speakers, mixing desks generally will have multiple outputs on them, so you can send audio to lots of different places. So you can take audio, send it to your speakers. You could also take audio and send it to your live stream, as we've already said. Another thing that we're going to look at a bit more later on is sending it to in-ear monitors. I'm wearing some in-ear monitors today. In-ear monitors is a way for you to be able to listen to, so normally the band, to listen to what they're doing, so they can listen to the singers and the guitars and keyboards and whatever else they've got going on, and they can make sure they stay in time with each other, make sure that everybody's in sync with each other. In-ear monitors is a great way to be able to monitor sound, to listen to sound. Monitoring just means listening to, keeping a track of. So I am monitoring the live stream right now so I can hear what's going out to the live stream. But you can monitor any number of things. You could monitor band monitors, so you can listen to what the band are listening to. Other things that you might send sound out to, you could send sound out to an induction loop for people using hearing aids. You could send sound out to like a creche room or a kids room, so somewhere where the kids can go and the parents can listen to what's going on in the service. There's a number of things that we can send out of a mixing desk, and audio can go to a number of different places from our mixing desk. There are options of different types of microphones. We have various different types of microphones, and depending on, as I said at the beginning, depending on which ones you've got, you might need to talk to somebody in your church who can tell you what microphones you use for what jobs. There are lots of options, and it's not really very easy for me to say to you, you will have one of these that will do this job. There are so many different options that it's kind of difficult. So make sure you talk to somebody in your church who knows what microphones you use for what purpose. As I say, you might need to check out whether you're using a digital or an analog mixing desk. There are two different types of mixing desks. They do work slightly differently. Although they're bringing audio in and then sending it out somewhere, they do that in a slightly different way. So you need to figure that out as well. So you might need to talk to somebody in your church about that and to work out what type of mixing desk you've got and what you need to know to be able to use that. Beyond that, at that point, you should be starting to get a bit of a feel for your sound system. So you know now that you've got inputs coming in at the beginning, they're connected to stage boxes, that's connected to a mixing desk, that's going to be connected to amplifiers and speakers, but it's also going to be connected to maybe a live stream, maybe an induction loop, maybe band monitors. All those kind of things are all going to be coming off your mixing desk. And that really is the essence of a sound system. That is what the basic level of your sound system is going to be doing. Now we are going to be doing a session later on specifically how to use the SQ5 console, and so I'll talk you through a bit more detail of some of the controls in there. So if you want to know a bit more about how to use a mixing desk and what some of the controls are and how they work, stick around later on. We'll deep dive into that a lot more and look at a lot more of that. But for now, that is the essence of a mixing desk. That's the bare bones of how it all fits together. So hopefully that's been helpful. If you've got any questions, as I've said, chuck them in the comments. I'd love to know what questions you've got and whether there's anything I can answer for you. But yeah, hopefully that was a very brief introduction into sound systems. So we are going to move on, and let me find the right screen. I've lost my place now. I told you things were going to go wrong today. So we are now going to look at how to send video. So video, sorry, let me just set my timer going, so I've got a timer for this one. Video has lots of different ways that we can send a video signal from one place to another. There might be some of these terms that you've come across. You might have heard people talking about some of these things. You might not necessarily know what they all are and what they're all doing. And certainly I find a lot of churches don't know which one to choose at which point for which thing. So we generally, I would say there are 4 main ways that we're going to send a video signal from one place to another. And each of these ways of sending video has pros and cons. As with everything in life, there are benefits and there are negatives, and we need to choose the right one for the right job at the right time. But in order to do that, you need to understand what they are and how they work and what the benefits and the negatives are for each of them. So as I say, we've got 4 main options that we're generally going to use to send video from one place to another. And those are going to be SDI, HDMI, NDI, and HD-based-T. Now those, as I say, you might have come across some of those terms in the past. You might have heard people talking about some of those things. You might use some of those things. You might know what some of those things are, but you might not understand. And generally, I find that there's at least one of those in there that somebody doesn't understand generally. Let's have a quick drink. So let's have a look at those, what the options are, why we might use one, what the pros and cons of them all are. So SDI. SDI is generally something that's used on cameras. You might find cameras, so like the Blackmagic Ursas that we talked about earlier on, generally the slightly higher spec of cameras. So the pocket cameras and the micro cameras that I've been talking about here don't have this on them. They're sort of slightly more budget cameras, if you want to use that term. So they don't have SDI outputs on them. Generally, an SDI output is a slightly higher spec output for a camera, but you will find SDI outputs on cameras. SDI is generally used for cameras, and its benefits are that so it's got a locking connector on it. It's what's called a BNC connector, which you have to push in and twist to lock on. So it means, like with an HDMI, if an HDMI gets pulled, it will just come out. And if you want to make sure that your signal is very robust, it doesn't just drop out, particularly if you've got a camera. You might have an installed camera that's mounted out of reach somewhere, and you don't want to risk that cable pulling out and just dropping out. You want to make sure it's in there and it's locked and it's never going to move. BNC is a really good option for that because it's that locking connector. You will also hear terms with SDI, so you'll hear about SDI 3G SDI, 6G SDI, 12G SDI, and you may have heard of some of these terms and again not quite understand what they mean. Essentially what they're talking about is how much data is that system capable of sending, and quite often with SDI what we actually talk about is how much data can it send over a certain distance of cable, and that the longer the cable gets, the more that signal is going to drop off. And so you could have a particular piece of SDI cable, and you might say that at 3G, so that's the lowest amount of data, so 3G you would use certainly for full HD is absolutely fine over 3G. You can send a 4K signal over 3G SDI, but the higher the frame rate of that resolution, so you've got resolution and frame rate for every video signal that you send, the higher the frame rate, the more data there is there. So if you're going to send a 4K signal at, say, like 120 frames per second, so a really high frame rate, I'm I mean, I don't know why you'd do that. It's normally 120 frames per second would be like slow-mo video, so you wouldn't really send that particularly for like a live stream or anything. You're unlikely to use that in a church. But let's imagine that we did want to send 4K at 120 frames per second over a piece of cable. Now, at that point, you've got a lot of data to send over that cable, and 3G might no longer be suitable, and you're going to probably need to then step up that cable. So you might then look at a 6G or a 12G. Normally 12G cable is going to be for much higher resolution, so if you want to send an 8K signal or a 12K signal over a longer distance, then you're going to need a higher rating for that cable. But as I say, the further that distance goes, the more that signal is going to drop off. So if you want to send a 4K signal over 100 meters, then you might find a piece of cable that will do that at 3G. 3G, 4K, 100 meters, we might be okay. Certainly with 1080p, if you're using a 1080p signal over 100 meters, 3G will probably be fine. But if we want to take that up to a 6K signal and send that over 100 meters, our cable is no longer going to be suitable of doing that. So we need to start looking at better quality cable, or reducing our resolution or reducing our frame rate. So SDI has a number of factors that you need to just think through. What frame rate are we sending? What resolution are we sending? How far are we sending it? And are all the bits of equipment in our chain suitable for 3G, suitable for 6G, suitable for 12G? What's the rating of the signal that we're sending? And so it needs to happen from the camera through to any conversion boxes that you're putting in. They all need to be, the whole chain needs to be 6G or 12G or 3G or whatever it might be. And so there's a number of things in there that you just need to think through. And it might be that you need to change something in order to make that system work. So normally, in a church context, you're certainly unlikely to need anything higher than a 4K resolution signal. If you're sending higher than 4K anywhere for any reason, it's definitely worth asking the question why. Why are we sending that high of a resolution? You're even unlikely to need to send 4K, to be honest. If you're doing a live stream, generally your live stream is going to be 1080p. So streaming anything higher than 1080p is probably unnecessary. There might be some situations where you need to, but generally speaking, reduce your resolution, reduce your frame rate, and you can send that signal a further distance without needing to upgrade to 12G cables and converters. So just think through, what am I sending, where am I sending it to? But generally speaking, SDI, great solution for cameras, and sending video from a camera to something like a Vision mixer can work really, really well over SDI. HDMI is probably one that we're all fairly familiar with. In fact, I've got an HDMI cable down here, just in case anybody hasn't seen an HDMI cable. I mean, you almost certainly will have done, but HDMI, very standard. We use it quite often. HDMI, very common to come out of something like a laptop on an HDMI cable. Also, lots of input devices, so TVs, projectors, those kind of things will quite often connect on an HDMI connector. So you might well have those at both ends of your signal chain. Input end and output end could both be on HDMI very easily. HDMI is very common, relatively cheap, and most people are familiar with it. It's something that most people know about and will be quite happy to use. The downsides of HDMI is it really isn't very good at sending things over a great distance. HDMI was designed when DVDs were created. HDMI was designed for use with DVDs, and it was designed as a cable to send from your DVD player to your TV in your lounge. So if you think in a typical lounge, how far away is the DVD player from the TV? Often a meter. Even in a very extreme situation, it might be like 2 or 3 meters. Theoretically, you can run HDMI up to maybe about 10 meters, but personally, I would stick to 5 to 7 meters. Now, yes, there are HDMI cables that you can buy. You can get fiber HDMI, you can get HDMI with little boosters in them, all that kind of stuff. Yes, it all exists. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't like any of that kind of stuff. It's not its intended use. It's one of those times where you take something that isn't intended to do that job and you're stretching it to make it do that job. And although you can get away with that in some situations, it's rarely a good idea, and it's almost certainly going to leave you to have some sort of a problem. So if you're wanting to send video over anything greater than 5, 7 meters, I would be looking at a different solution other than HDMI. So HDMI is fine for short little connections. So I would quite often use an HDMI camera if I'm coming out of a camera on HDMI and I need to go from a camera to a vision mixer, and you can touch both of those two devices at the same time, then I'd have no problems in running that on an HDMI. I've got an HDMI cable coming out of this one. I can't quite reach my vision mixer, but it's just there. So this is a 5 meter HDMI cable, which is absolutely fine to run from here to there, no problems, quite happy with that. But if I'm going any further than 5 meters, I would be converting that signal. So HDMI, great for short distances, nice and simple, quick and easy, very cheap. But if we're going to go any further than 5 meters, probably worth looking at changing that to something else. The next option is NDI. NDI video you might be less familiar with. NDI got a lot of use during lockdown and the pandemic. Lots of people started discovering NDI during that time because NDI, the kind of easiest way to understand NDI is it's a network video solution. So if you've got two devices that are sat on the same network together, it can be quite a nice way to send video between those two things. So for example, if you've got a ProPresenter computer or something similar and a live streaming computer and they're both sat on the same network, you could send video from ProPresenter to OBS via NDI, and in fact that is exactly what I'm doing here. So this image I'm sending from a ProPresenter computer via NDI into OBS. So my ProPresenter computer that's out of shot over there is on a network, and my OBS computer that's on this screen here is on the same network, and so I can connect those two together via NDI, and it works really well. So if you've got devices that are on a network and you need to send something between the two, NDI can be a good option. Some cameras do have NDI options in them. I would say it's less common than SDI, but it is there and it does exist. And if that's something that you want to look at, particularly if you've got a church building with an with a network infrastructure in place, then that could be an option for you. You do really need to make sure that you have a good, reliable network in your building. As soon as you start putting any kind of high quality video signal over your network, you're going to start stressing that network. And if you're going to send multiple video signals over that network, you're going to really start to put pressure on that network. So make sure your network is good and reliable, you've got good cabling in place, good network switches, all kind of high quality equipment, and then NDI will be absolutely fine. If you are in any way in any doubt about your network, then I wouldn't rely on it for sending NDI video around. So if you can send it via a network, NDI can be a really good option for you. If you've not got such a reliable network, then I probably wouldn't try and do that. And then finally, HD-Base-T. Again, depends on what area you're in. HD-Base-T is one of those that for some people it's really standard and everybody uses it all the time. For some people it's far less common and they don't really know about it. HD-Base-T you can basically think of as HDMI over Cat5. So again, you need a conversion box. You'll convert your HDMI signal to a Cat5 cable, and then you can send it over much, much greater distances. As I say, HDMI cable Personally, I wouldn't run much more than 5 to 7 meters. If you convert to HD-Base-T, you can send it kind of up to 100 meters without any problems. So, excuse me, noisy bottle. So if you want to send an HDMI signal over a much greater distance, HD-Base-T is a really good way to do that. For example, if you want to send a laptop to a projector, you've got a really simple system, there's nothing in the middle of it, you just want to go a laptop straight into a projector with nothing else, HD-Base-T could make a lot of sense. Effectively, it's like a long HDMI cable. It's the way to kind of understand that and to treat that. So HDMI cable out of your laptop into a conversion box, down a piece of Cat5, convert it back the other end to HDMI and plug it into your projector, and it will do basically everything that HDMI would do. So it carries all the same security features. So you've got HDCP, which is a security thing that you find on things like DVDs and stuff, will be carried down HD-Base-T. So all of that same functionality that you would expect to find of an HDMI cable will be carried down HD-Base-T signals as well. So if you need something that supports if you need something that supports HDCP security stuff, then HD-Base-T could be the way to go for you. Now, all of that said, lots of information, lots of letters that you throw around in the video world. What would I actually recommend that you do? As I say, SDI is very common for cameras, and if you're in a building where you're using cameras, you're very likely to be using SDI. And personally, I think it makes much more sense that you don't mix and match protocols. So if you've got cameras, you're using SDI, then I would use SDI everywhere. I would run everything over SDI because it just means that you've just got to buy one set of cables, one set of connectors. If you know how to plug in an HDMI to an SDI converter, you get one of the little converter boxes and you can connect that together, then you know how to connect the entire system together. You don't have to worry about sending different things via different methods to different places. So if you're using cameras and you're using SDI, then I would go SDI everywhere. Equally, if you're using cameras and you're using NDI for your cameras, then it might make sense to use NDI everywhere. But again, just need to think, do we have a good enough network to be able to send that video everywhere? And it might be that something like a projector might not have an NDI in, so you might be able to take NDI from your camera into a switching device, but you can't then send NDI back up to your projector. So you might need to think of something else to do that with. HD-Base-T could be an option, and you might then have to use one protocol to come in and a different protocol to go back out again. But as much as you possibly can, I would say pick one and stick with it and use it everywhere, because it just means you've got one set of cables, one set of connectors, and you're not having to think through different options for different signals at different places. It's either all NDI, or it's all SDI, or it's all HD-Base-T, but try and find one that can do everything and stick with it as much as you possibly can. If you're not using cameras and all you're doing is bringing laptop feed, so you might be looking at ProPresenter for your song lyrics, and I don't know, maybe that's about it. You might just say, well, let's just use HD-Base-T, because that will work fairly well for computer to TVs to screens. So HD-Base-T might just be your option to go for everywhere, but just think through what makes most sense in your situation and try as much as you can just to stick with that one protocol. Now, that was a lot of information overload, just kind of dumping stuff on you. So if you've got any questions on that, please do put them in the comments. As I say, lots of information in that one, and it can be a bit difficult to try and work out exactly what makes most sense for you. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And as I say, please do use the comments. I would love to answer some questions. If you've got some specific questions about what to do in what situation, chuck them in the comments and I'll try and deal with those ones in a little while. Right, where are we up to on our timetable? So we have now got 6 hours and 25 minutes remaining on this live stream. I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to go and grab a drink and just nip to the loo. But yeah, so far I'm enjoying this. I think everything's working quite well. I've not seen any comments for a little while. I'm keeping an eye out on that. If you see me looking over here, by the way, that's checking comments over this side. So yeah, I think so far everything seems to be working. After the break, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about should you buy a digital mixer in 2023. It's quite an interesting one, that one, because as I say, this is a follow-on from what has been my most popular video on the channel, which was back in 2021. I said, should you buy a digital mixer in 2021? At the time, I had no idea how popular this video was going to be. I think it's coming up on 40,000 views or something now, which for my little channel is quite significant. So yeah, I'm going to pick up on that one, bring it up to speed, answer a couple of the questions, because there's been a lot of comments on that video. And I'm just going to try and deal with some of those, try and answer some of those comments and questions, and yeah, give you a little update. Should you buy a digital mixer in 2023? So for now, let me change my thing over here, and trying to make sure I push all the right buttons in the right order. I'll see you in a few minutes. Let's take a little break.